Well, hi everyone, Corey Barker here again, and this week I've got something really cool. Some of you may remember last week I had posted a photo or image of this car dealership street sign. It was the Hyundai dealership sign, as you can see this one right here. It was on my Facebook and my Twitter page, and it's actually a 3D graphic created entirely in Photoshop, and it's based on the actual sign at the dealership. I was there a while back and noticed that it was just a relatively simple cluster of simple shapes, really. If you just look at the base graphic or the base element of the sign itself is this gray structure here, and then you've got this blue element, and then you've got just simply the extruded logo embedded right in there. So it's really just a few simple shapes that are just strategically placed to make it look like. Now the lighting is of course what really sells it in the end as far as realism and everything like that. But what I wanted to do is just kind of go through the steps of how I went about creating this element right from scratch entirely right here inside Photoshop. Now we begin with a series of basic shapes to create the sign. Now I've got several path layers here, as you can see in the paths panel. And the first one is the base, the gray base structure of the sign. And it's actually kind of a cutaway, as if we're looking at it from the top and looking down, because we're going to create an extruded element of that, and that's going to be the base of the sign itself. And then I've got another shape that's going to be the blue part of the sign. It's going to contain the logo, and then I've got the logo elements here on separate shape layers as well. I've gone ahead and modified the logo and the name a little bit, just for the sake of copyright and everything like that, because I'm not actually getting paid by Hyundai to do this, but I just wanted to use something similar to what I had used before for the sake of this tutorial. So let's begin with the base shape. We're going to go ahead and create the base structure of the sign. So I'm actually going to go ahead and select that path 1, and then I've got a layer in the layers panel selected. It is filled with gray. I'm just going to keep it as a base gray fill there. And we're just going to go to the 3D menu here in Photoshop and go down here and choose the new 3D extrusion from selected path. And it's going to go ahead and extrude that. And let's bring out the 3D and properties panels. We're going to need those to modify our 3D object here. So with the current view selected, which is rotating the current camera view, I'm going to rotate this around, and you can see the extrusion we've got on the object right now. And I'm going to go ahead and select the layer 1, or layer 2 rather, in the 3D panel. And then over to the properties panel, I can see my extrusion depth slider here. I'm actually going to push that really high up there, probably almost maxing it out, to be honest, and really giving me that really long base, the sign structure that I need there. So I'm going to go back to my front-facing view. Now what I need to do is actually rotate this 90 degrees on that ground plane. You'll notice the ground plane that the object is casting a shadow on. That's the invisible ground plane. I'll actually go ahead and turn that on. Let's go ahead and do show ground plane there. And if I rotate my view, you can see, well, it's actually put a layer here so you can actually see what's going on. But so you can see that line, those coordinates there that are just kind of showing you in the shadow, shows you that that ground plane element there. Now what I need to do is actually stand this graphic element on its side. So I'm going to go ahead and select layer 2 again, and then over in the properties panel jump over to the coordinates panel, which is the very last tab here in the properties panel, and then go down here to this middle set of numbers, and this is the dimensions, the angle of the object. And I'm just going to select the X angle here and just input 90, so that rotates the graphic element 90 degrees. And then I'm just going to go into the pop-out menu of the 3D panel. And then right at the top here, you're going to see Move Object to Ground Plane. I'm going to select that. And that aligns the bottom of the object with the ground plane itself. So now let's go ahead and take our camera view and actually readjust so we can see the entire element in our view here. And what I'm doing here is actually moving my camera view. I'm actually moving my camera back, and that's giving me the ability to fit that entirely in the frame there. So if I rotate my view there, you can see now the shadow is being cast a long ways, and that's because of the way we've positioned our object on the ground plane there. So bring that back to that view. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this camera view right here. If you can see in the properties panel right now, it shows me under view, it says custom view 2. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we'll call this home master view. And that will be the main camera angle we can look at our object at. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and create another layer and go ahead and give it again, another simple gray fill. And we're going to go ahead and extrude our next object, which is the second part of the sign, which is that thicker area where the blue part's going to be. Now I'm going to go ahead and select that. And just like before, make sure the layer is selected. Go to 3D, new 3D extrusion, selected path. And I'm not going to adjust the extrusion just yet, but I am going to go ahead and rotate it just like I did the other object a moment ago. I'm going to go back to that coordinates tab there, and again 90 degrees here, and there we go. Now I want to start merging these elements together. I need them to be all in one 3D layer so they can interact and reflect and cast shadows and such like that. But right now these two objects are on two different 3D layers, so we need to merge them together. And you can merge them the same way you can two regular two-dimensional layers in Photoshop. I'm simply going to press Command or Control E, and because it detects it as two 3D layers, it's going to merge them as such. Notice it's now merged into a single 3D layer. However, the elements are still separate here in the 3D panel. So we've got layer 1 and layer 2. If I select this one, that's the main. Well, actually, let's go ahead and call this the main structure. Just go ahead and rename it. Just make things a little easier. And this is the, let's call this the, the main structure. Lost it there for a second. And we'll go ahead and do layer 4. This will be the blue section. And I'm going to go and use my axis widget here just to hover over that little yellow arrow, or the blue arrow rather, and then just when it turns yellow there, I'm just going to nudge it up that axis and position it right there. And let's go ahead and rotate our view and see how it's positioning on the object. It's not too bad. I'm going to go ahead and select that and adjust the extrusion depth. I want to make it a little bit thicker, something about like that. And once again, I'm going to rotate my view here and see. I'm actually going to make that a little bit thicker. I'm actually going to select that object. And then here on the axis widget again, this time I'm going to hover over the green and scale it on the Y-axis right here and just scale that out a little bit. And it makes it protrude out of the sign there a little bit. And we'll just rotate our view back around, and there we can see that looks pretty good. I might want to even nudge this over just a little bit. I like using that axis widget. It keeps things on the axis that you want to keep them on as you're moving objects around, so it's a really handy little tool there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and bring it back to our home master view. And let's go ahead and colorize the blue part of the sign here. So I'm actually going to select this and then click again. And you'll notice it goes ahead and goes straight to the layer 4 extrusion material, which is the blue section extrusion material right here in the 3D panel. So I'm going to jump over to the properties panel, and right over here in the diffuse property, I'm actually going to go ahead and create, or rather go in here and edit the existing texture. Just go in there and under diffuse. And right now it has no color fill at all, and that's why it's got that simple gray fill on the extrusion. But I'm going to go ahead and use this blue color I've got here. It's actually one I've got saved in my swatches panel, but if you want to see what the color is actually made of there you can see it's the RGB numbers are right there to get this shade of blue on there. So I'm going to go ahead and close that and save the changes, and there is that part of the sign there. Now what I want to do also is colorize or make blue the top and bottom of that element as well. Notice the top area here. So I'll just go ahead and do front inflation, and we'll do the same thing. And we'll just replace that blue, the gray we started with that blue. And it will go ahead and do that to the top and bottom, as you can see right there. All right. So the base structure is there. Let's go ahead and bring this back to the front-facing view yet again. And let's go ahead and add the logo elements. So I've got one logo element here on its own path layer. I'm going to go ahead and give this. Now this time I'm actually going to fill the layer with black instead of gray, because I want this to be a chrome looking object. I want it to reflect like chrome. So I've discovered that black filled objects will reflect objects, give it the most chrome look, and you'll see in just a moment what I mean. So but we're going to start with a black filled layer, and I've got that path selected, so I'm going to go ahead and do the 3D again, 3D extrusion from selected path once more. And there we go. So there we can see our object. I'm just going to go ahead and rotate my view here and adjust that extrusion just a little bit. Seems like a bit much, so let's go ahead and bring that down a little bit. And I'm going to reset the default camera. And I'm going to go ahead and merge it with my existing elements. So I'm just going to go ahead and press Command E yet again. It's going to merge that element down. And we'll go ahead and select it in my 3D panel here. It's layer 4. We'll just go ahead and call that logo. And I'm going to use the widget. I'm going to hover over this arrow that's pointing straight at me, basically. It's the Z-axis. Click and drag down, and that's going to bring that element forward in space. And then we'll just use the axis widget again to just nudge it up and over and into position. And the little square right here, actually, you can see it better. I'm just going to rotate my view a little bit. I need to scale the overall logo element. So I'm just going to select it, and then this the block right here in the middle of this axis widget scales the entire object proportionately. So I'm just going to scale that down. And we'll bring it back to the front view, and that looks pretty good. Now, let's add a few elements to this logo piece before we move on. I'm actually going to have it selected here in the 3D panel, and then over in the Properties panel here, I'm going to jump over to the third tab at the top here, which is the Cap section. And we want to apply a little bit of a bevel to this, so I'm going to increase the bevel amount to right about there. That looks pretty good. And then I'm also going to go over here and under the inflate section, I'm going to leave the angle at 45, and I'm just going to nudge the strength up to about 2. And that's going to give me a little bit of a curvature on the front face of that logo, so it will actually reflect the element, the chrome element we're going to add in just a little bit. It'll actually reflect that a little bit better by increasing the surface area just a little bit by putting a little bit of a bulge on it. All right, so that's all we're going to do for that. Let's go ahead and bring the text in. And again, we're going to do the same exact thing, a new layer. And I'm going to fill it with black once again. And we'll take the text. Let's go to 3D yet again. 3D extrusion, selected path. And I'm just going to go ahead and merge it right down to the object. And let's go ahead and get that object. Rename it. We'll call that text. And I'll just nudge that forward, just like I did with the other logo element. And we'll nudge it up. So you can see how you can have some fun just taking multiple 3D objects and building a fully designed sign or concept or just anything really, and just have a lot of fun with it. So it's actually to reposition that. Let's just move this around and see. Now you can see the text is protruding out quite a bit more than I need it to, so I'm actually going to nudge that back a little bit. Again, using that axis widget keeps it on that axis, but I'm looking at it from a different angle so I can see the best positioning for it. And that looks good right there. So once again, we'll bring it back to the front view, and we're looking pretty good. All right. So now it's time to start adding the surface properties that we want, so it'll reflect and act like we expect it to when we put it in an environment. So let's attack the logo elements first. So I'm going to start with that logo, and we'll go ahead and select the front inflation material. Now, I want it to reflect the chrome element. Now, normally I would do this with an image-based light, but in this sense, there's more than just one element here, and I don't want the entire sign to look chrome. So I'm going to isolate the chrome effect to just the logo by applying an environment map instead of a image-based light. So with the front inflation material here selected under the logo element, I'm going to go to that environment property and choose load texture. Now I have a file that I use quite a bit here, and it's this chrome element here. Pretty much any chrome image will work. The more abstract, the better, but you want to have some variation of tones and things like that in there. So I like to use this one. So I'm going to go ahead and click open on that. And in order to see the reflection, I'm going to have to obviously bump up the shine and the reflection property here just below. Now notice right away you can see that reflected element in that sign. If I move this around, notice how the elements interact with that part of that logo right there. That looks pretty cool. So now what I want to do is I want to apply that to all the other parts of the logo as well as the text in order to have that same look. So I'm going to do that by saving this material. Now, before I do that, I'm actually going to go in here and just increase the brightness of the specular highlight there a little bit. Yeah, that looks good. And let's go ahead and save this material. Now I'm just going to click on this little preview icon here and then click on this little thing that says new material, and we'll call it Chrome Sign. And now that material is saved. So now I don't have to go through all the steps I just did to apply it to another surface of this element. I just go in here and now select the front bevel material of that same object, and then just go in there and choose that material I just defined, and it goes ahead and applies it to that element. So you can see right there. Then now let's go ahead and select the extrusion material, do the same thing here. And let's go ahead and select the text. Now with the text, I did not apply a bevel, so I'm actually going to go back into that cap section and just increase my bevel a little bit here. And let's put it around 30. And again, with the strength, I'm going to bump that to 2. Just gives me a little bit of a curve on that text. Now I'm going to go in and select each of the materials of front inflation. And you can actually go ahead and hold down the Shift key and select all 3 of them. Front inflation, front bevel, extrusion, and just go ahead and select that material and apply it all at one time. You can see it goes ahead and wraps that element around there. So now as I move this element around, you can see that the chrome is interacting with the environment as it moves around and looks pretty good there. All right. So now let's have a look at the blue part of the sign here. Now this is what we're looking at is obviously the bevel, or the extrusion material rather, of this sign element. And I want it to kind of reflect the environment a little bit. So I'm actually going to go ahead and set the shine to 25. And I'm going to do the reflection at 25, but I'm also going to increase the roughness at 25. And that actually softens the reflection. When you have the roughness at 0, it's going to reflect whatever pretty much at 100%, almost like a mirrored reflection. But increasing the roughness smooths it out and gives it a much softer reflection. The higher you go, the softer the reflection gets. So if you want that kind of faded reflection, that's what that roughness setting is for. But in this case, that's what I want it to be there. So I'm actually going to do a little test render here and just give me an idea of what I'm looking at so far. And again, this is not applied to any environment yet, or we've adjusted any lighting or anything like that. We're going to do that once we put it into the main file. But I think that looks like it might work pretty well so far. So looking pretty good. Again, back on that blue section, we've got the shine, reflection, and roughness at 25. I'm going to go in there and just bump up that specular brightness just a hair. That looks good. All right. So I think now we're ready to go ahead and bring it into the environment we're going to place it in and start dressing the lighting based on that. Now I have a simple sky background here that I want to bring the sign into, like the one you saw in the original. And to do that, I'm just going to take the layer itself, grab the 3D layer, and just drag and drop it into this new file. And there you see it. So the first thing I want to do is actually position it the way I want it to look in the final image. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that by rotating the current view, which is the camera angle that we're looking at. So to get the sense of a wider angle lens, I'm going to go into the properties panel while I have the 3D panel open. And you've got the field of view here, and you actually change the camera lens in a sense. You can actually determine if you want it to be a wider lens or a longer lens, but I'm actually going to bring it down to about 15, and that's going to push the object back in space, but we'll bring it more forward. And then I'm going to rotate it like we're getting like an upward angle, as if we were standing on the street looking up at the sign or something like that. So, and once I do that, I'm going to do another quick render. I'm just pressing Shift Option Command R or Shift Alt Control R, and just gives me a quick little render. It actually starts to do a full render, but you can actually cancel it at any time. It just gives me a good idea of what I'm looking at here. And I can see right now that I'm gonna need to adjust the chrome file that's reflecting in here. It's not looking like I want it to, so I'm actually gonna go ahead and select that chrome sign. And because it's using the same file, it's going to cascade down on any changes I make to one. So I'm going to go in here and just edit this texture and just give it a blur. Let's just give it a motion blur and remove a lot of that harsh line and detail. And that's it. I'm just going to go ahead and close that. And you can see we've got a much smoother gradient or variation of tone in the sign now. So I'm actually going to do another quick render and let's see what we've got. So now it's looking a lot better. So we're going to add more lighting to that in just a moment, but I like the way that's looking. Okay, so now let's take a look at the environment. We want this to look like it's sitting in an environment. So naturally, if it were in this kind of daylight setting, it would reflect the light around it. So what we're going to do is actually go to that layer that contains the clouds or the sky and do a Command A and select all, and then Command C to copy to the clipboard. And then we're going to jump back over to the 3D layer, and you're going to make sure you have environment selected here at the top of the 3D panel. Then over in the properties panel, let's move that layers out of the way. So environment selected up here. Over in the properties panel, you're going to see an element called IBL at the very top here for image-based light. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the pop-up menu here and choose new texture. Now it's going to remember the size of the document that is in the clipboard, which is that cloud image or that sky image we just copied. And it creates the new document based on that. Now we have to go back in there and choose edit texture. And I'm going to paste that cloud image in there. Now I'm going to adjust it a little bit. I'm actually going to make a duplicate layer and desaturate it and change the blend mode to multiply. Now just real quick, to desaturate that is just Shift Command U or Shift Control U. And then I'm going to change, again, that blend mode to multiply and then drop the opacity of that layer to 50%. And that's all there is to it. I'm going to close this document, save the changes, and now you're going to see that color kind of wrapping around the object. It's like it's picking up the environment light in the scene. But now what I want to do is make a few adjustments on the object itself. Now, let's go back and select that environment property. I've got the light applied, and it looks really good, but I'm actually going to drop the intensity of that image-based light to around 50. And I'm also going to go down here to the shadow. You'll see the setting for softness. I don't want the shadow to be a harsh-edged line shadow like you're seeing here. So I'm actually going to bring this up to about 60. And I'm going to do the same thing with the light that's in the scene. Now, in this case, we have an infinite light applied to the object. And this is actually the default setting. When you create a 3D object, it creates an infinite light. A lot of the time, I'm not using infinite lights. I'm not really a fan of them. But in this case, it actually works pretty well. But I am going to adjust its positioning by you can see this giant orb in the middle. It kind of in this little line gives you an idea of the direction of the light. I'm just going to move it over a little bit to where the hot spot or the hot spot of the light basically is shining on the corner of the sign there. And I think that looks pretty good. And again, let's do another little test render and just see what we're looking at here. And just get a good idea of what finished product we're going to get here. So that actually looks really good. It's actually looking about like I expect it to. The shadows, not so soft. Now, that's because we haven't adjusted the infinite light shadow softness here. We did on the environment. For the image-based light, we adjusted it to 60. But on the infinite light, let's go ahead and adjust that softness to 60 as well. And I'll go ahead and leave the intensity there. I'm actually going to adjust the positioning of that light just a little bit more. And let's do another render and go ahead and see what we get out of that. There we go. So now you can see the edge of that shadow looks a little bit better. It's a lot softer. Actually, it's picking up. It's not so harsh like it's not so much like it's an artificial light shining on it, but rather it's a more like daylight. Now, in that bevel of that logo element, I'm actually seeing more of those lines in there, which means I'm going to have to go in there and adjust that manually because it did not cascade down. Let's go ahead and actually double check this. And we'll do edit texture since it did not link, so we'll have to go in there and it's going to apply that same blur as we did before. Close it and save the changes, and now you can see that it smooths out much better on that sign. And we'll do another render and just to see what we got there. And that looks pretty good. So just doing a little bit of tweaking at this point. It's really just by going in there and just adjusting the lighting and the specular. Actually, adjust the specular on this front of this sign here a little bit. There we go. Make that a little bit brighter. There we go. But once you have the lighting in place and the entire object is dressed, you can go in here and change that angle of view. Just grab that current view. And if you wanted to get it more straight on view, if you wanted to get it higher angle or at a different angle, you could do all that. But the point is being able to create realistic items or objects and then placing them in your scene. Whether it's a 3D model you downloaded from another site and you brought it in and you lit it and textured it here inside Photoshop. You can do both. You can create your own objects or import them. But in the end, it's all about the lighting and being able to create a very realistic setting. And what's key here is, of course, using that environment light, being able to take the background element, the sky or whatever, and then applying that as an image-based light. It essentially wraps that light around the object, and it really gives a sense of it being in the place where you actually applied it in there. And you can have a lot of fun just creating these kinds of seemingly complex 3D objects from simple shapes. What did we do? We created 4 different 3D shapes or 3D layers that we merged together and was able to position and light and even change the camera settings in a sense to give it a much wider angle look, as if you were really up close looking at this sign at a very low angle. Really, really cool stuff with 3D in Photoshop. I hope this clarifies some things for you. Be on the lookout for a lot more really cool 3D stuff coming here on YouTube, as well as my new courses coming up this year on kelby1.com. We'll see you guys later.